Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I need to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. With regard to interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Please also note that during the meeting, it is not permitted to take pictures in the room or screenshots on Zoom. Should any technical challenge arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Today, my apologies, I seem to be having a connection problem every once in a while. Today from AGT Food and Ingredients Inc., we have Murad Al-Khabib, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. Carmel Transport International Limited, which I believe has been unable to be with us today. Masoud Nigrad, Chief Operating Officer for N. Tepperman Limited. And from Quorum Corporation, Mark Hames, President. Welcome to you all. My apologies if my connection's going in and out. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with the rounds of questions. Mr. Al-Khatib, I invite you to make opening statements of up to 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate. Canada, with a specific focus on Western Canada, has been blessed with a significant agricultural endowment with some of the best and most productive agricultural lands in the world, making Canada a world leader in agricultural production and export. For decades, we've been known as the Canadian breadbasket, or a breadbasket in the world. However, in recent years, we've been increasingly known as the first stop on the protein highway. With food, fuel, feed, and fertilizer, Canada has what the world needs and wants, and Canadian agriculture is on the front line providing societal solution to global challenges in protein, food security, and renewable fuels. Will be vital to the United Nations FAO mission to produce the same amount of food in the next 40 years as we have done in civilization for the past 10,000 years. And to feed that growing middle class and a world population that will exceed 10 billion, we need to meet that target. International trade is the lifeblood of the Canadian economy, making transportation, and specifically rail, ports, and containers, the veins and arteries that allow everything to flow, providing goods to Canadian consumers and allowing Canadian companies to supply their products to markets around the world, creating economic benefit and jobs to all Canadians. In the ag sector, we've always wrestled with transportation-related issues, specifically during cold Canadian winters. When you're landlocked 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers from port, you're dependent on rail and road infrastructure to get your products to market and the availability of containers to ship them in, while also staying competitive on costs in the marketplace. In Western Canada, we're dependent on containers to bring our retail goods from far-reaching origins around the world, and we use those empty containers to move our products, our agri-food output, as well as other products and manufactured goods to markets around the world. Rail, intermodal, and containers are in high demand. We're urging governments, railways, and all supply chain partners to be diligent in their planning to be ready for these opportunities. As AGT, we're a large user of ocean containers. In fact, we are among the largest agri-products container shippers in the whole world. We've navigated the system of containerized shipments for decades. However, this process is getting more and more difficult with escalating costs, lack of access to container units, and supply chain disruptions. Without primary shipments from origins around the world of retail goods, and the willingness of the steamship lines to allow their containers to stop in Western Canada empty to be filled with ag products, Canada does not get access to empty cube to refill our goods for shipment to our customers before that cycle begins again. And even when we do have access, the escalating costs may make using that container for shipment prohibitive to doing business without an ability to pass increased costs on, in particular in staple foods and commodities. Part of the issue is supply and demand. It's a basic economic theory. Freight costs have risen extremely fast, with steamship lines reporting record profits throughout this period of COVID and now with the Ukraine cost and supply chain disruptions. An example, a container costing $3,000 in 2019 is now costing in certain lanes over $23,000 per container. Some of the largest global steamship lines have recently reported earnings that exceed their average earnings over the past years by multiples. Far be it from myself as a free market economy participant to criticize profitability. However, this does come at a cost for customers and consumers around the world. Part of it is lack of oversight by governments in industrialized countries to establish a playing field for container and steamship lines and customers to equal the competitive playing field. In recent periods, the government of the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada have begun discussions and inquiries into cartel behavior, price fixing, and steamship line competitive behavior. With no global regulatory body in this sector and being thousands of kilometers from port, our federal government and governments around the world are very critical to ensure that we have a level and competitive playing field. While the global demand for protein is strong and growing, Canada is in a unique position to fill that gap. It's been magnified by the conflict in Ukraine, where again, food insecurity is open and going to be felt by up to 600 million people around the world. The National Trade Corridor Fund availability of funds has really been helpful, and strong leadership to create a transportation policy framework to support trade has been critical and important to maintaining Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier. As you may recall, I was involved with the David Emerson Transportation Act review a number of years ago, and I was honored to be a part of the Industry Strategy Council with Monique Leroux, where we did actually rekindle recommendations around long-term infrastructure planning in the trade space, in particular, moving those windows from 2 to 4 year mandates of government to 10 to 50 years of actual trade infrastructure planning. We have a generational opportunity in agriculture and for our country more broadly, and within this, containers are a key surge capacity for Canadians' agriculture sector, augmenting traditional rail and ships that carry our products. I'll be happy to take questions from committee members on rail, transportation, and supply chain challenges. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alkabir. Mr. Nagad, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good day, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak about our view on logistics issues with transportation containers as a comparison. I represent Entepperman Limited, which has operated a chain of retail stores in 6 cities in Southern Ontario for 97 years. We sell furniture, mattresses, appliances, and electronics. Many of my comments are based on our business challenges. I've submitted a written brief with references, which goes into much more detail. We are experiencing many challenges in the supply chain, specifically importing containers to Canada. Some are related to steamship lines. Others refer to inland challenges with delays, reduced planning ability, and cartel-like pricing, leading to massive price increases for Canadian consumers. We are witnessing Canadian inland bottlenecks due to several factors: infrastructure and ownership interest in ports and rail, which are not Canadian focused, congestion at ocean container terminals, congestion at rail terminals at port and destination, lack of available resources, and lack of available equipment. In the first half of 2022, container volumes at the Port of Vancouver dropped 7%, but containers sat on the port's docks for 6 days, twice as long as 2019. Despite the drop in overall volume, Vancouver's performance and efficiency continue to fall, leading to longer wait times. Out of 370 ports around the globe, the Port of Vancouver is ranked 368th, the world's third worst port. Tupperman's ocean freight containers go to West Coast Canadian ports and end up on rail. The world uses 40-foot containers to ship goods from overseas. Only half of CN and 10% of CP cars are designed for 40-foot containers, causing blockage and delays, and leading to additional charges levied by rail companies. Cargo destined for Toronto area is offloaded at Brampton Rail Terminal. We have seen unprecedented wait times of 10 plus hours this year in Brampton for drivers to pick up containers. Another issue with inland terminals is the buildup of empty containers that need to be returned. In some cases, steamship lines have refused to offer freight pricing to Toronto due to wait times involved with shipping empties back. Pre-pandemic, we had a fixed price contract for ocean containers, but steamship lines have refused to honor our contract pricing since early 2020. Pre-pandemic, we were able to ship a full container from Asia to Canada for $3,500. That increased to $30,000 in early 22, an increase of over 800%, while steamship lines reported record profits. The price fixing of ocean freight increased cost exponentially, causing some of our furniture to double in price by early 22. Recently, due to extremely low demand, container costs started to drop. Last May, steamship lines tried to force us to sign a 3-year contract at a rate of $16,500 per container. And today, we're seeing pricing around $7,500. But they're already talking about blank sailing, which is a practice of strategically removing some vessels and port calls from their posted schedules, forcing customers to buy into the few remaining ships at premium prices. As this behavior continues to be unregulated, shippers and producers face the prospect of additional price increases in the future. While one might assume that these issues are impacting Canada and US equally, this is not the case. Canadian importers often pay more. If demand suddenly spikes, we expect that steamship lines will immediately and aggressively increase their pricing. Although freight costs may not return to $30,000 per container, we believe it could easily double. In closing, Tupperman's is guided by the principles of being a good employer and providing great value to our customers. This international shipping crisis challenges those principles and threatens our continued operations. We hope that our government can intervene to protect retail, wholesale, and manufacturing sectors, ultimately Canadians across our nation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nagad. On to Mr. Hems for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee for the invitation to attend today's meeting. I'm Mark Hemis, President of Quorum Corporation. Quorum has been responsible for monitoring Canada's prairie grain handling and transportation system on behalf of Transport Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada since June of 2001. I provided a document to the committee before, and I don't plan to read the whole thing, but there's some points that I would like to make. First, the export of grain in containers has become an integral part of the logistics of the grain industry in Canada. As a proportion of the export movement, it has increased from 1.3 million metric tons in 2000 to over 5.5 million metric tons in 2021. It represents an increase of the total exports of grain from 4% to over 10% today. That's allowed for an increase in the diversification of crops that producers grow and a very lucrative business for the country. This came about through an increase in the availability of container capacity in the marketplace. Grain is typically moved in bulk, but the empty containers actually gave an opportunity to expand it to niche markets, much as Murad was explaining earlier. In the last 3 years, from 2018 to 2021, an average of over 6 million metric tons of special crops have been exported using containers out of the country. And that's an important part of that sector. That sector has grown incredibly in the last just 10 to 15 years, almost wholly dependent on the use of containers to get into the markets that they're selling to. Now, what happened in the summer of 2020 with the pandemic hitting, the container shipping lines significantly reduced the number of sailings, or called blank sailings. By doing that, essentially what they left was a whole bunch of loaded containers on the docks in Vancouver and in Prince Rupert, and to an extent in Montreal. And as such, shippers had to pay incredible amounts of storage fees, demurrage, and the out-of-contract penalties that were associated with it. With the reduction of those incoming vessels, both the empty container capacity and the vessel capacity for loaded movement was significantly strained. Container shipping lines then began to reduce requests for empty containers in North America for loading those export goods, and ordering the railways and the container terminals to remove all the empty containers back to the origin countries, mostly in the Asia Pacific area. The Port of Vancouver average monthly total of loaded export containers dropped by 33% compared to the average in the same 12 months in 2019 and 2020, while the number of empties moved out increased by 96%. This change had a significant impact on the export of grain and containers and the business volumes of the 5 transload operations in the Port of Vancouver. Total volume of grain and containers was reduced by half from April 2021 to May 2022. Some of that reduction was because of the reduced crop size, but most of it was because there was just no containers available to move it. The consequence of these issues compounds and reveals itself in the actions taken by the container shipping lines to expedite empty containers back to the line haul origins, as well as the increased price that they charge for the movement of containers through that period. And as was just pointed out, while those container prices have dropped, it's not terribly significant when it comes to this movement. Canada has little in the way of real-time or historical data on this, and it makes it very difficult to analyze any of the assessment of the movement of containers except for the data supplied by port authorities on a voluntary basis. In the grain industry, both the Canada Transportation Act and the Canada Grain Act offer legislative and regulatory solutions for the collection, analysis, and assessment in the bulk movement of grain. However, there's little in the container movement. This applies to all the other commodities as well, other than grain, to provide a detailed assessment of the impact these shortfalls have on capacity. Data at a level that is equivalent to what is provided for the bulk movement of grain is absolutely essential. In closing, I would point out that Canada grows some of the best and most desired grain in the world, but must contend with barriers and risks no other competitor nation must. We have a longer length of haul to port, extreme geographic impediments in the form of the mountain range, climatic conditions that can vary from -40 to +40 through the year, and our ocean distances are some of the longest to our buyers. As such, just staying even with our competitors on a global basis is dependent on us having the world's most efficient transportation and logistical system in the delivery of our products. The fact that we have not been as efficient as we need to be and we have experienced a continued number of supply chain breakdowns, it's damaged our reputation as a reliable supplier. Canada's position in the global grain marketplace depends on us getting a lot better. Thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. We appreciate your contribution to while we study the trade implications of transporting goods in railroad corridors. On to the members now. Mr. Hoback for 6 minutes, please.
Sharon, thank you, witnesses, for being here on a Friday afternoon or Friday morning, depending where you're at. Where do you start? It seems like in my year as a politician here in Ottawa, we've been fighting with railways to get movement of product to market every year, every second year. It seems like they're always coming front and center in our targets. I guess let's start with this. Is there things that we should be doing, because it is the trade committee, is there things we should be doing as a trade committee in our trade negotiations and in our agreements, whether it's at WTO or let's say in a multilateral side, that is addressing the steamship lines and their monopoly and their level of service to put in some guarantees for shippers? Maybe I'll start off with you, Brad, and I'll go to Mr. Moussad afterwards. I'm Brad, sorry.
Okay, well, I would say that the competition, regulation again would probably not be a multilateral agency, but again, the overall collaboration that we're seeing between the U.S., U.K., Canada, New Zealand, Australia, I think is an interesting approach. The one thing we've got to recognize is the steamship lines are international companies operating in international waters, calling our local ports. So there definitely is a need for a bit more oversight, to ensure that accessibility, pricing, and the behavior doesn't become completely out of balance. So I think that again, urging our competition authorities to be collaborating is probably a very important step.
Mr. Moussad?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say that the issue that we face is potentially twofolds here. One is that the steamship lines and their behavior, and as it was referenced by myself and another person, it's cartel-like pricing. And, in terms of what jurisdictions would the government have on putting restrictions around that, it would be great if there are things that could be done. But the other part of this is the supply chain system in Canada, as Mark referred to it, is broken, and potentially that's where the government can also have a significant influence to improve the supply chain. The reference to our ports are not efficient. Part of the reason that we actually get higher pricing than the US is that these shipping lines, they get stuck when they come to a Canadian port, whereas they have a much better transition of unloading and reloading their ships if they go to US. I looked at a price list yesterday. Our containers, by the time it gets delivered to our door, was around $7,500 coming through Vancouver. We look at Seattle Port, which is not very far from Vancouver, from Shanghai. So in both cases from Shanghai was $2,015. So how do you compare 2015 versus close to $7,000? And that's because the steamship lines would prefer to go to US than to go to Canada. Part of it is volume. The other part of it is all the backlogs that we have. And in terms of backlogs, I think we have lots of opportunity to improve those.
So then that raises a million questions then. Okay, what has U.S. done to, is it the modernization of their ports? Is it the functionality of their ports? Is it the bureaucracy? Or is there legislation that just allowed them to expedite product through their ports? What's the difference between the two?
The first one would be the volume and the ability to receive a lot of products quickly and efficiently. When we look at the age of our key ports, they were built somewhere between 1972 and 2008. When you look at a port that was built in 1972, then the size of the ships and how many containers they used to carry, which the maximum size at the time was 2,500 containers. Today, the maximum size is 25,000. So our ports haven't been updated quickly enough. There are plans for some of these ports to be upgraded, but not quick enough to receive these completely different size ships than when they were originally planned.
But
the efficiency would be a component of that.
But wouldn't that be up to the Vancouver Port Authority to actually to put in process the upgrades and updates, or is this something where the federal government should be stepping in and flipping part of the bill or most of the bill?
I believe that government support would help because all of these private sectors are driven by ROI for their shareholders. So ultimately, they will invest what they believe they're guaranteed to get back. So if we want to solve a Canadian problem, influence from the government could help us, whether it's subsidies, support in other ways, but helping them plan to really get rid of the problem in Canada.
Mr. Hermes, I'm sorry, we're tight for time. I don't mean to cut you off. So is the issue when it comes to moving products through their ports, is it the port issue, or is it actually the railways not getting and delivering the product to the port on time? Where's the actual problem? Where is the bottleneck?
I think it's all of the above. I think what happened through the pandemic and then coming out of it, there was a sudden surge of traffic that was a surge in demand, if you will, for traffic to move through all of the West Coast ports. The railways have got a fixed number of rail cars. They don't plan on a lot of surge capacity. And I would go back to the earlier point that I think this whole situation has really pointed to how fragile that whole supply chain, the whole container supply chain is. Yeah, you can point to the railways because when you've got so many containers piled up on the docks at the ports, it's really up to the railways to get those containers off the dock. And the challenge that the container terminals had is that you can bring a ship up to the dock and try to unload it, but if there's no room on the dock to put any more containers, they're stuck. And that's how they ended up backing up all of the vessels in Vancouver and where that frustration came. But the same problem was occurring down in LA and Long Beach to far, far greater degree. At one point in time earlier this year, there was as many as 90 container vessels at anchor waiting for to be unloaded.
So when we got a situation,
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, Mr. Hoback.
Yeah, no problem.
On to Mr. Sheehan for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I truly appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions. As you're aware, for our witnesses, we were studying opportunities, in the Indo-Pacific, and we had a group of soybean representatives, and it triggered, some line of questioning that I had from one of my constituents that is a broker that deals with soybeans, and it was about container shortages. MP Massey has been after this for a long time, and so is our chair, Judy, as well. So thank you for coming and presenting, because we want to figure out how we might make some recommendations to, immediately improve the situation. But we also have to take a look at long-term logistics. And my questions are through you, Chair, to perhaps Mark, one of our witnesses. I'll start with him, and perhaps the other witnesses wish to chime in. It seems to me there's a multitude of issues that are out there, and they've been identified by all of our speakers. One of the issues that we haven't delved into too much, but I'd like you to speak about, is the labor shortage. We understand the shortage of containers itself, the monopolies that certain countries are creating, the cartel, and whatnot. But it seems to me that there is a labor shortage, and it can be in the trucking industry, which this particular broker had mentioned to me was, a shortage recently of truckers. So that begins the process of a problem. The rail companies and the shipping companies as well, albeit. He also shared the opinion that one of our speakers had mentioned about the shipping companies are making record-breaking profits. But through you, I'll start with that question, Chair, about labor shortages, and what does it look like for you, and are you experiencing that as well, or see that as an issue?
Yes, there is an issue. Truckers have had a long-standing issue with trying to hire people into the industry. They've got a big bubble that's starting to hit to that age of retirement where they're in a real challenging time. Railways, on the other hand, what happened with the railways, and one in particular, was that when the pandemic hit and the volumes decreased, and then again with the smaller crop last year, they laid off a lot of people. And when you lay off people who are at the younger end of the spectrum, they will go out and find another job. And it's not as if you can call them back. So both CN and CP have been working through the summer trying to increase their workforce. But of course, you can start the training, but it takes 4 to 6 months before you can get a person out on the ground. So I think, I was at CN's training facility just a couple of weeks ago, and it is full. They've got classes running, multiple classes running, trying to replace some of the people that they need to fill those jobs. But they're challenged, and it's no different than anybody else in the industry right now. It's very difficult to find people who will come to work. Speaking to some of the transloaders out on the West Coast, they're having the same issue. They had to lay off a lot of people last year, but now that they're trying to get back into business, they're having a difficult time getting people to come to work. And of course, Vancouver is not a favorable economy to get blue collar workers who aren't making the kind of money that you need to live in Vancouver. All of those things have an impact on trying to fill a lot of those labor positions that are going on in the industry. And I'm sure, Murad, you've probably had similar situation just in Saskatchewan as well.
Well, I think that we should look at all of the issues that kind of play on top of each other. And I think that one thing we've got to be very clear on, Terry, is that we've got to ensure we have the infrastructure that is suiting the business model of the steamship lines too. Like, for instance, in Regina, we spent $35 million of our own capital as AGT in a partnership with CN Rail to build an inland container terminal to stop the empty containers that were flowing from Chicago and Toronto back to Vancouver. We stopped them in Melville, Saskatchewan, bring them to Regina, fill them with grain, and ship them back. That infrastructure didn't exist. What we try to do with that is minimize the dwell time for that container to sit here empty. So, while we're, talking about the steamship lines and cartel behavior, and I mentioned that, we have to recognize it's an international market. We have to get containers in and get them out as quickly as possible in order to ensure that the steamship lines want to bring their business to Canada. Now, with all due respect to our witness, Mr. Negad, I don't know if I agree that Vancouver and Prince Rupert are less efficient. The problems, as Mark mentioned, at Long Beach have been far worse. And I think the problem here is we just don't have enough sailings. The steamship lines have cut our service. There's just not enough not enough supply, which is why they can charge so much more. In the US, it's a competitive market. Everybody has to go there. In Canada, they've chosen not to come here. And those containers that are coming here, they're charging 3 times the amount for. That's our problem. It's simple, fundamental supply and demand problems. Hopefully that's going to switch back. I believe that the efficiency of Vancouver and Rupert are going to bring more containers into Canada over the next periods.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sheehan. Then on to Mr. Sabar Tremblay, please.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, and hello to my colleagues as well. Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure whom to ask this question specifically, so I'd like to ask the question. If someone would like to answer, I encourage you to do so. Of course, because of my duties, I wish to focus on the consequences for Quebec, and more particularly for the Montreal port, which is the second largest port in Canada. So we know that congestion in ports and import containers being delayed in Vancouver and in Prince Rupert have forced CN to establish special container depots in Montreal and Vancouver. If someone can go into greater depth on that and the consequences that may have.
I have to answer in English. My apologies.
Oui, ne vous en faites pas.
Don't worry about that. We have an interpretation service.
it's interesting, and I can only speak from the grain industry perspective for Montreal, but whereas we saw these huge decreases in the amount of export traffic through Vancouver and Prince Rupert, we stayed pretty much even through the Port of Montreal. That effect of having to rush empties out through the West Coast wasn't nearly as severe in the Port of Montreal. Now that said, a lot of the, as Masood pointed out earlier, a lot of the traffic that's going into Eastern Canada, especially from Asia Pacific nations, does flow through the West Coast. And from that perspective, I know that there's a lot of warehouse space in Montreal and as well in Toronto that has now been taken up with goods where people are now buying product far, far further into the future or to satisfy future demand than they would have previously. And that has caused increases in costs related to transportation and inventory.
Parfait, je vous remercie. Mais
Thank you very much. But as regards the presence of these special emergency, in Toronto and Montreal rather, these emergency container depots, is that something you can answer about?
I think that just about every city in Canada, as well as the United States, has had to make room for empty containers because there just isn't the capacity to move them in, or for that matter, bring in product that's loaded. They're just trying to get the cycle back into a synchronous move. And I think part of the biggest problem in the supply chain today is because through the pandemic and then what happened after that, the entire supply chain lost that balanced cycle of equipment between origin and destination. And that's what we're suffering through right now. I think it's going to take another couple of years to bring it back into balance. And like I say, those emergency storage areas, they're probably going to have to continue to be in place for at least another year and a half, maybe 2 years. That's my understanding from the people that I talk to in the business.
And if I could add, in our case, if we didn't have the Port of Montreal, we would have been in big trouble. So, we took containers that were destined back to go west and we reversed course and took them east. And on the export side, we serviced Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East from Montreal. So we saw a dramatic shift in our volume from, let's say, 60% West Coast export to probably 60% Montreal export. So, again, this is going to be part of the strategy we do need to employ as a country, is use all our ports. So Vancouver, Rupert, Montreal, and Halifax are going to be very important on the container side.
merci pour vos réponses.
Thank you for your answers. Otherwise, in order to remedy these problems, we know that there are shuttle costs that have been brought in, as well as a reduction in number of days that they can be stored free of charge. But to give you just an example, Canadian National in Valleyfield, it's $500 storage. There are various shuttling costs that are added. Does that have an impact on your sector?
Ancillary charges are massive parts of our cost base. And what we've seen is, with the disruption in the supply chain and, pricing variability, all of ththose ancillary charges have also went up dramatically. So, the ancillary charges are now, at a point where sometimes they're as much as what we used to pay for containers. It's quite an alarming additional cost.
Okay. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Massey, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for presenting here today, and thank you for the committee for looking into this. I did a short inventory of some of the challenges. The first time I kind of ran into this was when I first toured the Port of Vancouver with the removal of detector dogs. They would bring out a CBSA officer with the dog, could clear a ship in 3 hours. They were getting rid of that, and it would take then 3 weeks or 3 days to actually sometimes get the ship done by hand without the dog. And so we've also heard testimony that there's issues here for shipping containers. There's issues for the rail system itself. We also have a lack of infrastructure We have a lack of competition, it appears, or at least a competitive spirit. We have a shortage of labor. I mean, it feels like we're trying to straighten out a plate of spaghetti here. There are so many things that are taking place. I'm wondering whether or not, how do we kind of find a vehicle to get this taken more seriously? I hate to like we have had in the past, actually, like a rail white paper and so forth that actually led to a lot of condemnation on CP and CN because it was described by those as a culture of fear and intimidation in the workforce, and it led to some changes. But I'm wondering whether or not we need some type of other route to combine some of these things, especially given the testimony we've had about international behavior, and then as well too the data that's missing. So I'm going to maybe ask all the witnesses to give me their input as to do you have any practical solutions for this committee to go forward? We want to do some recommendations like Mr. Sheehan has identified, and I'm just looking to see if we can scope that down. Maybe I'll start with my friend from Windsor. To give a preference of a local, Mr. Nagad.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree that when we look at supply chain, as it was already pointed out, it's never one component. It's not just a port, significant impact by rail, and whether it's their equipment or whether it is labor, those things have already been pointed out as well. And everything that's happening, in our case in Brampton, is also multiplied by challenges with labor, where drayage companies have to wait for a container for over 10 hours to pick up a can. And it's just too extended of a time. And a lot of people are even actually getting out of that drayage business because it just doesn't pay. So as it was suggested, it makes sense to perhaps start with a whiteboard and look at all of these challenges and then say what is practical. If you take each one of those and do the root cause and get to the base of it, is labor the biggest issue? Is the physical cans the bigger issue? Is space the bigger issue? Is port the biggest issue? All of the above, and perhaps a long-term strategy for Canada in terms of what's most important, where do we start, and how do we take this in pieces and deal with it.
Thank you to Mr. Al-Khatib.
Yeah, Mr. Massey, I would say that very key in my mind is analysis of that infrastructure gap that we have. Again, land and apron space at the ports is at a great premium. We need to ensure that we have infrastructure inland to be able to handle, containers and intermodal. And as Mr. Hemis has mentioned, the percentage of containerization in the grain sector has risen from 4% to 10%. And we expect that that's going to go to millions of additional tons. We need the infrastructure plan to be, as I say, a long-term solution. We need to better plan, our port infrastructure and our railway connectivity into inland locations. Today railways are still going through the middle of our cities. These are all inefficient, long-term solutions that need to be implemented to ensure we have a modern trade infrastructure. As we look at inland ports, we need to have apron space available, efficient in and out so that you can minimize things like waiting times and that for both pickups, drop-offs, and then refills, and then getting those containers back on. If we don't do that, at some point we won't be efficient, and the steamship lines will never stop here.
Okay. And to Mr. Hems, just real quickly before, to give credit, Alan Rock, the Minister of Industry back in 2002, 2003, we did the same with the auto sector, where we actually created a red light for the worst things, a caution light for, things that were kind of, up in the air, and then a green light for good stuff, almost like to inventory the entire problems across the board from building a car to selling a car. Perhaps that might be a way to go. That was Mr. Rock's initiative, which he deserves credit. Mr. Hems, and I know I'm out of time, I'm sure.
Well, very quickly, I think I agree with what Murad had to say. I would also point to the fact that just the last couple of days, the Supply Chain Task Force released their report. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it, because they were pretty broad in what they looked at. And I think a lot of the ideas that they've put forward in there would address a lot of the process type issues, but the infrastructure side of it is absolutely a part of it. And I don't think that we've looked at things closely enough to point to where do you start. Right now, we're still in a almost a panic mode where we're trying to fix everything at the same time. And I think you have to go back to this point of where do you start with something like this? And if you fix one thing, it's going to be a case of whack-a-mole, to be quite frank about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. On to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. Unfortunately, this is it's kind of a gloomy Friday, so to speak, with regard to some of the testimony, although fantastic, true testimony, but it's gloomy, quite frankly, Madam Chair. So, when we hear that a container just a few years ago used to cost $3,000 to ship, and at the peak was $23,000 to ship a container, there's one taxpayer and one final end user, and that's each and every one of the Canadians. So that's, I don't know if it's price gouging, I don't know what it is, but that seems pretty wild, and no wonder that Canadians can't make ends meet. I guess the discussion is, it's not about just building more containers. That's not going to solve the problem. This is very much a shipping issue, so I understand it from that aspect. I'm fortunate to have visited ADM. They are a shipping company specifically for grain, right in the Windsor-Essex area. The majority of their shipments for grain go to the United States. So, who is, of course, our greatest trading partner. But in meeting with them, they sit right next to the Windsor Port Authority, and so I've also visited them as well and understand the whole rail side of things. So, ironically, like I've said a million times, if you can find it in Canada, you'll find it in Essex. I want to speak very quickly to Mr. Sheehan, and I really appreciate you, sir, bringing up the labor aspect of it. As a shadow minister for labor, I have been in direct contact with a lot of the unions, both on the east and the west coast, and I do realize that hours differ from coast to coast with regard to how many hours they can work compared to how many hours they can have off. So, Mr. Hems, you had mentioned about the third worst port in the world, which was Vancouver. So I'm going to say that's the bad news. Oh, no, I would have to say that's the good news, because we also have the Toronto airport that was deemed the worst airport in the world. I think now it's number 2. So perhaps the Vancouver port isn't as bad as we think it is. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Nagard, can you tell me, sir, what can we do going forward? If we had a magic wand today, what is the answer? What's the immediate answer to relieve some of this pain?
Madam Chair, I would say that I think we have sort of answered that. I think the suggestion of looking at the infrastructure is definitely a good one, and there is also the whole supply chain system, which has been suggested as well, to look at what's happening with the rails, what opportunities do we have with labor, if any, at this point. So I think getting more involved as a government would be the best thing that we can do, and just not sitting back and letting the private sector drive that wherever it may go. Canada needs help. Other supply chain systems need a lot of help and support. So by getting involved and doing the proper studies and addressing those key opportunities would be the way to start.
Thank you, Mr. Nagard and Mr. Hems. So let's think a little bit outside the box here. What can Canada do with other countries so that we are the leader and not the follower? Trying to think really big, trying to think really global here. Is there Is there a way that we can be the shipping corridor so we're not relying on the United States? We're not relying on Asia. We can be the destination. Any thoughts to that, sir?
Well, I would hearken back to the comment about the Port of Vancouver being the third worst. I don't think that we have that bad a system right now, especially at the port side. They were a victim of, I hate to use that word, but they were a victim of the circumstances of the time. They are, in fact, probably a very efficient port, but because of the backlog, the pandemic, and all those things that happened, the whole west coast of North America was inundated with containers in a fashion that we've never seen before or experienced before. But I would also point to Murad's suggestion that we really have to become more reliant on moving the containers out of the ports faster than what we do today. And that's an effort of coordination with the railways. And I think that could be a point of focus. Get those containers away from the port as soon as you possibly can. Some of the success that they've seen in the Port of Los Angeles, for example, has actually done that. And Burlington Northern just recently announced the fact that they're going to build a huge facility in Barstow, California, that does exactly that. They're just going to take the containers directly off the ship. They're going to run it out to Barstow, and that's where they're going to make up their trains, rather than doing it like we do in Canada, which is essentially making up the trains right on the container terminal's dock. That is probably one of our biggest drawbacks that we've got right now. Now, if you can start taking those containers away.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Rose, your
Thank you, Chair.
time is
Thank you.
up. Thank you. On to Mr. Barani, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm actually curious to hear the end of that question because, Mr. Hems, I'll say to you that I was quite taken by some of the earlier testimony about, I think it was Mr. Murad who had said something to the effect of it had gotten so congested on the West Coast that they were diverting more of their exports east towards Halifax and Montreal. So can you just finish, Mr. Hems, on this point about the change in the location of where you're loading up the train and how that change is working in around the Los Angeles area and how that might apply on Canada's West Coast? So over to you, Mr. Hems.
I would point out that right now they probably are doing the creating of the trains in Los Angeles and Long Beach very close to the dock. But what Burlington Northern is planning to do, and they've announced this, and I think that they will do it and it will be in place in the next 2 years, is taking them far away from the dock to what equates to an inland terminal, much the same as what Murad has created in the city of Regina. We don't really do that a lot here in Canada. There's an inland port just outside of Kamloops, BC. There is the one that Murad has got in Regina. They're trying to do the same thing in Winnipeg, but we don't really do that in Canada. And I think it really comes down to a total rethink of how we manage our supply chain and the logistics within the country. A lot of that is going to require the railways to get on board with this idea. A lot of it is going to require investment.
So if I could just build on that, because I think it was Mr. Nagad who had first given us that statistic about the ranking of the port in Vancouver. Is the ranking completely, well, how much of that ranking is informed by the length of time it takes to actually offload the containers off of ships in the Port of Vancouver? So maybe Mr. Nagad, Mr. Hems, you could try and answer that. Thanks.
The report that he's referring to was done by the World Bank and it was published in January and February, and it had a timeline of what was going on in 2021. And that's why I say that it's not exactly fair to judge the longer term efficiency of those ports based on what happened in 2021, because they were going through the pandemic. And yes, that ranking has to do with the amount of time that ships are in harbor, how long containers dwell sitting on the dock, both loaded and empty, and how fast they're processing the vessels through the port. when confronted with the situation that they were in that last part of the pandemic and the post-pandemic period in 2021, it only seemed reasonable that they would end up in that situation because they are the 4 ports or the 5 ports that exist on the west coast of North America, where almost all of the traffic that's flowing into North America is going to flow through those 2 ports out of the Asia Pacific countries. And that's how they ended up in that situation. So like I say, it's a real statistic. It was a real measurement, but I think looking at it in that isolated period of time is not fair to judge their efficiency on that basis.
And Mr. Nagad, did you want to add to that?
No, I mean, other than what does future bring? Because we've also talked about other comments that there's still opportunity for infrastructure. Whether Vancouver ends up being the 3rd wards or not, I think that the point is that there is an opportunity for us to really review this and see where the government of Canada wants to be involved in terms of adding to infrastructure.
Could I just add one thing? If the containers don't come into Canada, we don't have a chance to use them on the way back out. The more efficient we get in our ports, we need the U.S. volume of consumer goods to drive the availability of containers in Canada. Our population is too small and our productive output is too big. So this is the incentive. We get efficient, we draw the U.S. volume into Vancouver, going by rail into the Midwest U.S., we get the containers on the way back. That's the advantage for Canada.
If I may add, and
just quickly, go ahead, sir.
If I may add, and today those steamship lines don't want to come to Canada because for whatever the reasons are, we're taking way too long to turn around their ships. So we won't be able to achieve that goal that Murad is after unless we have more efficient processes in place.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I would like to ask our witnesses their opinion on the local situation, and I'll explain. An article from Reuters in June 2020 mentioned, or predicted actually, that the ports becoming overloaded and the high shipping rates would continue worldwide in 2023. According to your observations for our situation here, can we also expect things to continue or even increase in terms of the rates and the overloading?
Well, I could give a perspective to start. I want to make the gloomy Friday afternoon a little bit lighter. As I look out my window to our container terminal, I haven't seen this many containers in Regina in the last 2 years. So, equipment supply is loosening, and our steamship line rates for the periods of November, December, and January are declining quite rapidly. So we are seeing the global slowdown related to inflation and global demand slowdown starting to show its benefits. I'm a believer that by mid-2023, we will be getting back closer to the rates that we saw in the period of 2019-2020.
Merci.
Thank you. And my next question will also be for you, Mr. Al-Khatib, seeing as you spoke earlier about the strategic importance of ports. So I'd like to hear you more on that, please.
I mean, the bottom line is that the productive capacity of Canada is growing in every sector, whether it be our resource sector, manufacturing, value added. Containerization is needed. Our agriculture sector, as an example, is not based on bulk vessels any longer. That's a commodity business. The future of Canada is feeding the middle class income growth in Asia and in emerging markets around the world. That requires containers for value added product. We need port infrastructure to be planned. We need it to be connected.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Massey for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to follow up with regards to the port infrastructure challenges that we've had. And there was a mention, I think it was Mr. Hems, with regards to lack of data available. Is that something we can do through regulation through the Canadian Maritime Act, where the ports operate under? The ports are, politically appointed boards. and they are connected to, the Marine Act of Canada. Is that something that we can actually do through regulations? If you don't know, then I can follow up and find out myself. I'm just curious.
I'm certainly not a person who would answer a question on creating legislation, but I would suggest that because those stipulations exist already in the Transport Act and the Grain Act, I can't see a reason why you couldn't extend that to containers as well, whether it's in the Transportation Act or whether it's in the Grain Act or the Marine Act. There are stipulations in the Marine Act that I'm aware of that do call for information and data, but it's not necessarily to the same degree of disaggregation that would be required to do any kind of usable analytics or measures. And that's really what we need. We need more visibility in how containers move from origin to destination, what port they flow through, the rate and speed at which they move. Right now, we're wholly dependent on the data that's processed and provided by the port authorities, and they do that on a voluntary basis for the better part.
And I can assume there's probably no standards then that on comparables. And real quickly, just Mr. Nagati, most of your information coming from your own private research, is that where you, and then, and the other, or is it government resources? Just curious, because you've really done a lot of work here.
Information from our third-party logistics providers and research that's available to all of us. And the full brief that I've submitted has all the sources in there too.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Abotai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see you. It's been a while since I've been on this committee.
Yes.
I've done international business all my life, and what I see in shipping market is unbelievable. Is hard to understand, hard to comprehend, and truly, it's just beyond beyond many people to be able to put a clear understanding or explanation to what's going on. But what comes to mind based on the conversations and the observations that we've got today from the witnesses, that we have the problem is on the three levels: the government, the transportation industry, and the business industry. So the question to Mr. Hemmes, to Mark, is how do we sit down in front of each other face to face and say we do have a problem? If a container goes to on the same West Coast but to the United States side, it will cost 3 times less or maybe 4 times less than coming to Canada, that we have a problem. What is it? And how, let's really face the truth. What are we doing wrong in this country that we cannot really solve this problem and bringing goods to Canada or shipping goods out of Canada in the most efficient way compared to other economies?
Well, I think I can't speak to the rate issue. I do know that the rates have been fluctuating and they are coming down now, from what I'm told by shippers that I speak to. But where I think probably the biggest difference is in the level of competition. You have so many more ports with much more capacity in the United States, plus a population that is 10 times as great as Canada. And Murad alluded to this earlier, that in Canada, we don't have the demographic composition the same as you would in the United States. And because the majority of the traffic that is coming into Canada is consumer goods, they're always going to take preference going through a U.S. route as if that route is shorter. Where Canadian ports and Canadian railways have been able to compete is by moving them into some of those primary markets faster and more efficiently than their competitor U.S. railways could. And that's really what has been the key to the growth in Vancouver and Prince Rupert in particular. And I think what we have to do is we have to get back to the basics of the competition and making those ports back to being more efficient and more conducive for shipping lines to want to move through those areas.
So what stopped Canadian companies, importers, from using U.S. companies and bringing the product to U.S. and truck it to Canada, and that will cause the Canadian ports to lose business, and that, based on what I'm hearing, is really the direct result of the prices in Canada are unaffordable and so high. We're not talking 10 and 15 and 20%. We're talking 100 and 200 and 300% difference. So if we can continue this path, we can see the situation worsen by the day, because if I'm an importer, I would rather bring it to Seattle and then maybe truck it to Canada instead of bring it to Vancouver and pay 3 times more.
Well, I mean, in our business, going to the U.S., it would cost us more even with the higher rates. So it's not an option to do that. It will cost us more to offload truck than it would be to continue to go through Canada. We just need to recognize that, one thing that Mark said, we always have a tendency to beat up on the railways. In this case, railway service into the Midwest U.S. has actually been faster than U.S. railway performance. So we need to just continue to tune our chain.
I can understand the pandemic is a definitely big cause of what happened, but now we're out of it, and we don't seem to be going back as fast as we should. So we are losing an industry here. And if I'm gonna look at the 3 factors: government, transportation industry, and businesses, which one is more responsible, and which one should make the first move to be able to solve this problem?
Just a brief answer from whoever chooses to answer the question.
I think you have to go to the shipping lines.
I think you have to go to infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. I think those were 2 fast answers. Yes, on to Mr. Miao for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for participating in this study today. There's no doubt that there's effect on our supply chain across the nation due to the amount of containers. And I was wondering if anyone can share with me how much container does your business use annually, or to have a better idea of how much container is needed? Maybe Mr. El-Khatib can answer first.
Yeah, I mean, we would be one of the largest container users in the country. So, our Canadian business would ship in the range of 25 to 35,000 containers per year. So, again, that's probably among the largest 10 users in the whole country. So, from our perspective, though, we've had to recreate our supply chains, and likely in the range of about another 20,000 container equivalents have now been diverted to bulk vessels via the Port of Vancouver on bulk loading because containers aren't available. So our volume would be more like in the range of 50,000, but we're only doing 30.
And I did a quick calculation. It's about 346,000 TEUs a year for grain alone.
Thank you. And if Mr. Naged want to share that information as well?
Sure. I mean, we're a family-owned business. We're a very small regional chain, and we do less than 1,000 containers a year. But it's the pricing impact that is significant for us. And I should also clarify, I know that I made the comment, and it was based on data from yesterday, the Port of Seattle versus Vancouver. It's not always that much of a difference. When we did a study in February, it was a 30% difference, that US was 30% cheaper than Canada. But what's happening is that because these ports, the US ports, have more scheduled ships and volumes have dropped. They have all these ships already destined to go there, so they're putting them on a fire sale much more than what Canada would get.
Thank you very much
Just
for
to
sharing
clarify
that. So I also had a chance to speak to the Vancouver Port Authority a couple months ago, and I understand that they are also doing some expansion in the West Coast, one being the Robert Banks Terminal 2. And and I'm not too sure if I'm correct on this following information, but the Prince Rupert terminal cannot intake 40 feet container capacity. So most of those bigger container are coming in through the Vancouver port and offloaded through the West Coast to other parts of Canada. My question is, with the container limitation, and most of the time containers are coming into Canada, does any of your business see that empty containers are being shipped out right away after being loaded off because of how containers are demanded globally? Maybe Mr. El-Khatib can start.
Yeah, I can start. I believe that your understanding of the 40-foot situation in Prince Rupert is not correct. Prince Rupert can handle 40-foot containers, but we did see a very significant increase in the number of empty containers that were being shipped back, not only directly from the port, but also going by inland locations, empty and not stopping. Part of that was driven very much by the rates that they were getting out of Asia. So the containers were moved back empty, as they were getting $30,000 a container to come back. So from that perspective, they decided they wouldn't let them stay here. We're seeing that ease now. Business is getting, tougher for the steamship lines to get, and now they're taking all the volume they can get again, which is, again, going to be good news for Canada.
Thank you. And Mr. Nagad?
In our case, the return of containers actually in Brampton is causing a problem where there is congestion. And as I mentioned earlier, there is congestion in Brampton at the yards, and they've had additional yards added, and it's causing a big problem. And the drayage companies can't unload their empties fast enough, so they have to sit on it and until they are able to drop off their empties. So it for us, it's been a big problem with empties as well. They're not going back fast enough.
Thank you. And Mr. Hems? Oh.
Just briefly, sir.
I would just refer him to figure 3 in the document that I presented. It gives you the numbers on how much empty container movement there was out of the Port of Vancouver.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've completed 2 rounds of questioning. Does the committee wish to do another round, or does any of the committee members have some critical questions they would like to ask the witnesses? Okay,
I think we're good, Chair.
Everybody's good? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the witnesses. That was very valuable information that we'll take forward and look for some solutions that the committee could recommend. So thank you all very much. We will go in camera. So I will suspend for hopefully 2 minutes only, and we can deal with committee business following this. Thank you. Thank you.